economic climate where the power is with the employer, they'll put you on the discard pile before you even start. How many people here have Facebook accounts? I don't. But there are certain situations where if you don't have a Facebook account, you won't get a job. In the US in particular, there are employment agencies that require you to friend one of their agents in order that they're able to see what you've got on your Facebook account. There are employers who want to look at your Facebook account. Is this okay? Well, there are lots of ethical problems, there are lots of legal problems. Regardless, it happens. And it's one of the issues that we need to worry about. So, what this means, all of this means, is that what we have as a record about us matters. And it matters that we are able to have it. So the solution that is often offered, that is, you don't have to go on the internet, you don't have to have a Facebook account, you can stay off the grid and everything's fine, is not true. In the current way that our society works, you have to have a record, you have to be findable, and that's increasingly true. And if you want to be successful, you've got to be findable. I've just been reviewing a book for potential law students, and it says, everyone should go on Twitter. I mean, I love Twitter, so of course but should all students have to go on Twitter? If you don't have a presence, you seem less important. You seem less like somebody who's actually got a reputation. Now, I don't know whether that's going further, but I do know that we're going to need online information. So, if we do have that information, and it is needed, we must have ways to make it, and I use these terms appropriate, fair, and reasonable. Now, they are deliberately vague terms. And they're deliberately vague. You'll see deliberate vagueness throughout this talk, because I think that actually vagueness is part of what we're doing here. Part of seeing the internet, warts and all, as I see it, is understanding that things are not precise and are not perfect. And if we look for precision and perfection, we cause ourselves problems. And when I saw the reaction to the Google Spain case, the biggest thing that I noticed was that there were a lot of ideas, a lot of illusions behind the way people were talking about the internet that were creating their reactions. And these are the illusions that I think we need to start taking into account. And I'm going to go through them all, but there are basically three main ones. The illusion of permanence, that the internet lasts forever. The illusion of perfection, that everything in there is perfect. And perhaps most important one in relation to Google, the illusion of neutrality. So let's look at them one by one. The illusion of permanence. Now, I'm going to use kind of slightly religious expressions in this, and it's rather interesting having just been shown around the Book of Kells to be thinking in religious terms. But actually, a lot of what's talked about is thought about in quite a religious way, and almost a reverential way. And sometimes the idea that you can delete data is seen almost as a sinful thing. And the only reason it could be is if you have this in your head that somehow everything is permanent. But we also know at the same time that data is always changing. So the idea of permanence is dodgy to say the least. We know that websites come and go. And academics, when you're making a reference to a website, you always have to say when you accessed it, because you know that at some later date it may have gone. We also know, I hope, for data protection people, that what we call data minimization matters. That is, you're only supposed to hold data, suppose the minimum amount of data for the minimum amount of time to perform the function for which you gathered it. Which is directly the opposite of the idea of permanence. What's more, mistakes can and should be corrected. That's both legally, they're supposed to be corrected in terms of data protection, but also From an ethical perspective, you've got a mistake, you want to correct it. And this is the one that perhaps disturbs people the most, that sometimes old stuff, it's time for it to go. And it's time for something new to take its place. And I want to give you one example. This is from UK politics, and some of you may remember this. In 2013, a story appeared, it emerged, that the Conservatives had been amending their website. It was seen as really, really bad. Here are a few quotes about it. This is from the Telegraph. Conservatives wipe all pre-election pledges from their website. This is Sky News. There is a hint of Orwell in the efforts by the Conservatives to bury speeches published on the web. This is Daily Mail. Tories delete every pre-2010 speech and news story from their website in an attempt to rewrite history. These guys, Telegraph, Sky and Daily Mail, are active supporters of the Conservative Party. These are their friends saying that they're doing this. Now, what were the Conservative Party actually doing? Is it okay for them to move their old speeches? They were preparing for the 2015 election. They wanted to put their new stuff up. Now, I'm not normally someone who has a regular sympathy for the Conservative Party. But from their perspective, this seemed like perfectly normal. And these are their allies saying this. Well, their enemies say, well, this is New Statesman, not friendly to the Conservative Party. The internet won't forget Cameron's lies, and neither will the British people. This is not the 1980s. History cannot simply be rewritten. Kind of the hint that back in the Cold War days, we were always rewriting history and doing things in propaganda, and these things don't happen these days. But, again, I know there are quite a lot of computer people here. Famous quote from Gilmore: the internet views censorship as damage and roots around it. But what we have to understand is that this is not just a computer science statement, this is a community statement. The internet community finds its way around censorship. And I don't know whether you're all familiar with the idea of the Streisand effect, which is when Barbara Streisand found out someone had taken an aerial photograph of her house in Malibu, complained, and the result was that millions of people saw the photo where previously only a few hundred had. When you draw attention to something, it gets more attention, and actually it does the opposite. And so the reality was that because of this, everybody knew that the Conservatives had deleted their pledges. But as we discovered last month, that didn't make the blind bit of difference to the election. So even if the internet didn't forget it, maybe the British people didn't care. But it's a different thing. So we thought the Conservatives were doing all kinds of things to try to delete their history. But their history did not disappear, because their history was not the same as their website. Now, they did some quite sneaky other things as well. They changed the way that their sites could be spidered, theoretically, to prevent people being able to archive their old material. But even that didn't work, because people remembered. And we all do these sorts of things. We take screen grabs when we know someone's going to delete a tweet. Yeah? Because if those of you who are on Twitter, you see someone do something stupid, you immediately take a screen grab because you know they're going to delete the tweet and you want to have evidence that they said whatever it was that they did. People find ways, and that the internet is not just a technological system, it's an ecosystem, it's a community, it's something much, much bigger than that. So what does all this mean? Well, we have this one idea. We have this idea that things last forever. And people are always told, when you're worrying about putting bad stuff up there, you can't get rid of it. Something up there will last forever. What they really mean is that things can last forever. It doesn't mean that they will last forever. And many things disappear. And if people are familiar with the Wayback Machine, How successful is it? How functional is it?
Depends where you look.
Yeah, it depends when you look and what you're looking at, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and it's a bit of a mess in some ways. We sometimes can get back to the way things were, but often we can't. But more than that, just because things can last forever, it doesn't mean that they should last forever. And again, I'm really struck by having looked at the Book of Kells. The thing that's most remarkable about the Book of Kells is that it's one of very few things to have lasted from that period. It's not that it was the only one that was ever written in that time, the only thing that was ever done in that way. It's the one that's lost. And that actually makes it more special, in a way. Is it a kind of calculated, perfect plan that's kept it in its condition? I mean, I was listening to the descriptions. It's a series of accidents and happenstances and particular people being good at particular things. And that, in many ways, is how history tends to work. And again, I would recommend looking at Victor Meyer-Schoenberger's book on book Delete, The Virtue of Forgetting in the Digital Age. There are good and bad things about remembering. There are some things it's much better to forget. And there are some things that it's much better to remember. And it's not always obvious which it is. Whether something that will be better to remember or better to forget. And the idea of having a permanent, perfect archive at all times, when you think about it, is actually really rather creepy. And it can mess around with all kinds of things about how we live. If you remember, with a friend, every single bad thing that friend has ever done to you, you'd never be able to maintain that relationship. Every insult they've done, every time they've forgotten something for you, every time they've done something bad, it would be impossible to function. But the other thing here, and this is another key thing, is that context also matters. And the context in which something happens and how we remember it matters. Okay, that's permanent. What about perfection? Well, we have two different aspects to this illusion of perfection. One is that the archive itself is perfect, that is, the internet in some general sense, and that messing around with it is somehow sinful. And the other is that the indexing of that archive is perfect, so tampering with that index, in this case Google, is also seen as sinful. And this was one of the main objections to the Google Spain ruling, that people were tampering with the index of the internet, so they were therefore messing around with history, they were deleting the art, they were preventing people getting access to information, and they were interfering with freedom of speech. And the corollary of that is that Google's algorithm should be secret and nobody should be able to interfere with it. I mean, one slight issue with that one is that there's one group who interferes with it all the time, and that's Google themselves. They're always rewriting their algorithm. So this is where this idea of rewriting history comes in. But when we actually think about it and we drill down on this, we know that it's not true. We know about the errors. We know that situations change, and so that the information that was reliable at one point is now no longer reliable. We again have the idea that mistakes need to be corrected. And we also have the issue of bias. And I will talk more about bias with the next illusion. And this is also another reason that we always have to know access dates when we're recording, when we get something off a website. Not just because the website might have gone, but because actually what's in the website might have changed. And it does change. Third illusion, the illusion of neutrality, and I think this is the biggest. Because this is the one that people seem to most often fall for. This idea that some of the fundamental tools of the internet, how we use the internet, are neutral, organic, somehow independent in some strange way. And with Wikipedia, for example, it's crowdsourced, so it must be neutral in something, it corrects itself. But somebody writes the algorithms that control Google. Now, you may think when you're writing an algorithm that you're being entirely neutral, just as we think when we're writing any kind of piece of writing that we're being, as academics, as objective as we can possibly be. But we're always making assumptions. And even a neutral position is not really neutral. And biases again always apply. So let me just take this a little bit further. This is Wikipedia. These are what Wikipedia calls its 5 pillars. And I mentioned religiousness. Even the fact that they call them the 5 pillars gives you a sense of how they want you to treat it with a kind of religious reverence. The second of their 5 pillars, Wikipedia is written from a neutral point of view. We strive for articles that document their prominence in an impartial tone. So Wikipedia says we are going to be neutral. This is a study from February 2015, which revealed, it's one of many, that Wikipedia is inherently and in a deep way sexist. And it's a computational linguistics study, and again, I'd recommend you actually have a look at the study itself. It's incredibly revealing. It's not just the conscious stuff that shows this bias, but the unconscious stuff. It's not just the text that's written, but the way that it's filed. The way that the whole system works has deep inset biases. This is me being deeply biased myself. I should say everything has to do with bias. Saint Jimmy, I refer to him as, Jimmy Wales. A few things about Jimmy Wales that aren't necessarily publicly known. Firstly, he is an advocate of Ayn Rand's objectivist philosophy, which is part of this idea behind neutrality. Now, if anyone knows about Ayn Rand or has read any Ayn Rand, I can see a few faces not entirely happy with the idea. It's not that, I do disagree with him. It's not that I want to say that I've got something right and he's got something wrong, but what I would like to say is that he is not unbiased or neutral. His philosophy comes from a particular position, but he has gained this kind of sainthood, I call it, and there are several different ways in which Google tries to borrow from Jimmy Wales' sainthood. Google is one of the main funders of the Wikimedia Foundation. And again, I don't think this is particularly publicly known. Are people aware that Google is one of the main funders of the Wikimedia Foundation, one of the biggest funders? Google search results highlight Wikipedia results. You'll see them very often appearing at the top of the Wikipedia things. And to get back to the right to be forgotten, Google appointed Jimmy Wales as one of the luminaries on their advisory council on the right to be forgotten to make decisions about how they operate the right to be forgotten. Google says Wikipedia is neutral, we're neutral. And if we're neutral, you shouldn't be interfering with what we do. But if Wikipedia is not neutral, and there's plenty of evidence that Wikipedia is not neutral, there's a particularly good book called Wikipedia and the Politics of Openness by Nathaniel Katz, which is well worth reading. But if Wikipedia is not neutral, how can Google possibly be neutral? Because there are so many more different incentives for Google not to be neutral. And if there are any Marxists around, the idea from Marxist philosophy that you can even have such a concept of neutrality is a very difficult one. And look at all the different ways in which Google has an incentive not to be neutral. It would like you to go to a Google-friendly site. And there's evidence. For example, that they rank sites lower that have more advertising. Now they say it's because they know people don't want advertising. But it might also be that they want to go to sites where Google does the advertising. And they want to get the advertisements around the Google search results rather than the advertisements on the site which you actually go to. And there's some studies going on in Tilburg about that. But Google also mostly wants you to use Google more and more. So they want results that will make you use more Google. Now, there are plenty of studies, and here are a couple of them. That one's from 2012, this one's from 2014, which have indicated that there is inherent bias in Google results. And it says here that we find that the search engine is biased against publishers that display many ads even without integration. Integration can but need not lead to own content bias. And some of this lies behind the Google shopping case that is coming up right now. The European Union is challenging Google on being biased in favour of its own shopping services rather than other shopping services. And search algorithms do matter, and they matter because people trust them. And we have increasing evidence that when people use Google, if you look at the Google search results, I saw a really good study about this last week, which I haven't been able to integrate in here, what they call the golden triangle. If you look at search results, it's kind of about that shape. That the places that you click on search results, heavily biased towards the top of the search results, and increasingly down here. So, first page, almost always. Almost never beyond the first page. And this is a bit of Pasquale from the Black Box Society. Power to include, exclude, and rank is the power to ensure that certain public impressions become permanent while others remain fleeting. Now again, I'm looking back at history and actually what do we remember, what do we forget? Actually, the people who already control this are Google through their algorithms. And the idea, as many said, that the right to be forgotten was people messing around with it, giving Google too much power because they got to decide which one was forgotten and which one was remembered, is completely missing the point. They already had that power. All it was doing was highlighting how much power they really have. They have the power algorithmically rather than at an individual level, but they still have that power. And that should make us think about algorithms in general. And I just want to mention a few algorithmic things. I don't know if you followed the Facebook experiment. This is about 18 months ago. They experimented with messing around, and most of you are on Facebook, so you should know how this works. Messing around with people's timelines. 600 and something thousand, 689,000 people they experimented on, divided into 3 groups. One group, they made happy stories higher on the timeline, and they suppressed sad ones. Another group, they made the sad stories higher up and they suppressed the happy ones. And the third group, they suppressed both happy and sad stories. The result, slightly counterintuitively, people who got more happy stories got happier. And that was tested by the nature of what they posted. It was all done by analysis of the content of their actual Facebook posts. Some people had theorized that by seeing lots of happy stuff you would get sadder because you'd think other people's lives were more interesting than yours. But it seems that's not the case. The sad group got sadder. But the really interesting one, the one that wasn't talked about so much, is the one that had both the happy and sad stuff suppressed. They spent less time on Facebook. So what does that mean? Well, it means it's in Facebook's interest. This is the actual academic study that it's in Facebook's interest to suppress boring stories. So if you're boring, your stuff won't show up on your friends' timelines so much. Facebook is not in Facebook's interest for that to happen. And Facebook controls this all algorithmically. And they showed that they were able to control it algorithmically. So you can be censored for being dull. And this gets further on, because the algorithms are controlling more and more things. Facebook's new instant articles, which basically compile news for you as it happens, based on algorithms, which they again keep secret so you don't know what they are. Twitter is curating timelines more. And again, for those of us who are on Twitter, that's really annoying. It means that they control what you see. If you're following a lot of people, you don't see everything that you think you're going to see. And since 2009, we've had personalised searches anyway. So they tailor them to you. Now, I think the key here on searches and personalised services and potentially personalised prices is that our interests and Google's interests are not necessarily the same. Often they are. And often it's great for them to personalise something to what we want. But sometimes they're not. And we need to know when those sometimes happen. And then we've got increasingly the lovely Internet of Things, which will also personalise things even more. Anyone here with an Apple Watch? No? Okay. The more data is gathered about you, the more things can be tailored to you, or more specifically, tailored in order to benefit Google from you. So let me just talk a little bit about autonomy here. Why I go back to why I'm interested in all this. This is what Raz says. The autonomous person is part, and this is Raz's own brackets, author of his own life. The ideal of personal autonomy is a vision of people controlling to some degree their own destiny, fashioning it through successive decisions throughout their lives. The less we know about how the decisions are made, when they're made automatically or algorithmically, the less autonomy we have. We would like to be able to influence the decision, and that ultimately was the reason for Costea. Costea wanted to be able to control what people saw. And in the end, it means it's really about your power against corporate or algorithmic power. So, just to get my philosophy on this, what I want, before I get back to Cromwell, because I have to get back to Cromwell. What I'm looking for is a shift of power towards us, and not accepting that the algorithm is always right, and to understand that Google has responsibility, and whether we can make companies actually responsible for what these algorithms decide. Now again, some of you computer scientists, you don't want to show somebody the algorithm you've created. And I would say nobody sensible would be asking you to, though actually the French Data Protection Agency is trying to ask Google to show it. But what you can be responsible for the results of the algorithms. So, to get right back to the beginning, what am I really trying to say? Why have I called this the Internet warts and all? I think because the thing that we have to understand is that the Internet is not the simple thing that we like to pretend it is. There are no simple solutions. There are no perfect archives. We haven't got perfect archives. We will never have perfect archives. And that means interfering with the archives is not necessarily sinful. There are no neutral algorithms, no matter what we think. There is no static position. The idea of permanence and perfection suggests there's something there that we shouldn't be messing around with. And that there are no perfect historical archives to mess around with. And that's what brings me back to Cromwell. What's the truth about Cromwell? Okay. So let me talk about Cromwell's portrait, because talking about Cromwell in Ireland is very different from talking about Cromwell in England. But let me just talk about even him. The idea of talking about something warts and all is to suggest that there is some perfect state, some accurate state that you should be looking at. We should be painting him as he really is. Yeah, warts and all. But it suggests there is something that is perfect to see with all the warts, that there is some actual real thing. But why did Cromwell want himself to be painted with his warts? Now, again, you have to look at the man a little bit. Cromwell was a Puritan. Cromwell didn't believe in the sin of pride. And he was kind of trying to say, possibly, I'm not proud. Proudly. He might even be proud to show his warts. You see, I'm better than you because I'm not ashamed of my warts. Warts and all has been used to signify truth, but it really isn't. One of the things that they said about him at the time, and this is again part of the background story, that by painting without the warts, people would remember him as a more handsome man than he actually was. But how do we remember him? And that's why coming to Ireland to talk about Cromwell is very, very interesting. Because I just want to... I found this when I've been studying Cromwell a little bit. This is from History Today in 2012, a book by Tom Riley. And it said, Cromwell's military campaign in Ireland is one event that the British can never remember and the Irish can never forget. I mean, I found it fascinating that that's the case. And it's true. When you ask an English person generally about Cromwell, they won't think Cromwell's got anything to do with Ireland. They won't have heard of what happened in Ireland. They remember Cromwell chopping the head off our king. And that's about it. But you mention Cromwell in Ireland, and you get a totally different story. And I said I was English at the beginning, and even that wasn't actually true. I'm quarter English, quarter Scots, and quarter Irish, and then a quarter of all kind of mix. My Irish grandfather told me all about Cromwell in a way that the English don't learn about Cromwell. And even now, we don't know what was necessarily true. And if you talk about Cromwell also with a royalist in England, they hate Cromwell. You talk with a hedonist, they hate Cromwell's Puritanism. You take the Catholic perspective versus the Protestant perspective, they're totally different. And as I said, the English and Irish perspectives are different. Now, I'm not going to try to say that any one of these things is true, because I don't think any one of these things is true. And I think that's where I like to see the way that we deal with the internet. We have to understand that there is no perfect state, but that what the position we're in depends on perspective. We get more information, we learn more. But we have to understand our own biases and perspectives when we deal with stories, when we deal with how the internet works. And I just want to take it final step further, because I realise I'm losing it. When we look at the internet, I've talked about this in relation to the right to be forgotten in a way, but the way we try to deal with the internet is often based on these false dichotomies and these oversimplifications about how the internet works. And I was talking to Owen a little bit about the intelligence agencies over lunch. The Irish intelligence agencies, and I already said it, can I quote you on this? Irish intelligence agencies like to present an
Not
ideal
on Twitter, by the way. Before he says this, not for Twitter.
that the Irish intelligence agencies like to present themselves as being pretty incompetent, but not really very good at spying on you, so you don't need to worry about them. Yeah? Now the British intelligence agencies, GCHQ, like to present themselves as omniscient, omnipotent, perfect spies who are able to do absolutely everything in every possible way. And sometimes we think of them that way. Sometimes when we're thinking about surveillance, we think that everything is watched in a perfect way, and we're, the NSA are studying everything we do in every possible way, and they can kind of control our lives. And sometimes we think that the terrorists can get us at any moment, and they also are perfect users of the internet in every conceivable way. And are any of these things true? If you listen to our British government talk about the threat of cyber terrorism and so on, you'd think that they were absolutely perfect. None of it's quite true. And I mentioned about copyright. Are pirates good guys or bad guys? And I don't want any copyright lawyers to make a comment at this point. But sometimes they're portrayed as the fighters of freedom against the man. And sometimes they are the evil people who are destroying the economy of the world. Sometimes copyright is what holds our economy together. And sometimes it's what stops us doing everything that we want to do. And I was very interested to see the Jedi library from that. And we have another big issue around at the moment, this idea of trolling. Sometimes we think free speech is wonderful. And sometimes we think that internet trolls need to be rounded up and locked up in jail as soon as we possibly can. But if you study trolls, most people who other people think are trolls don't think they're trolls, they think they are being attacked by trolls. Anyone who's had the joy of looking at Gamergate? I don't want to talk about it, but I know that the people involved all think they are the victims in these cases. And what the result of this is in a legal sense, this is probably the end of what I already mentioned, is that often the legal solutions we come to are made on the basis of simplistic ideas, and as a result, they don't work. Now, the right to be forgotten, in my opinion, is a small thing that does a relatively good thing for a few small individuals. People like Costea, it actually helps them. And for the rest of us, it makes very, very little difference indeed. The main objections to the right to be forgotten come from high principles of freedom of speech and freedom of information that are really inappropriate in a messy, warts and all internet. And once we start to accept that the internet is not this perfect place, Google are not the champions of freedom of speech, and so on, we're more able to accept practical solutions to the problems that we have on the internet. And we're also more able to realize when they don't work that they haven't worked. Which, in the end, is how we should be operating. Sometimes we do things well, sometimes we do them badly. And our biggest problem is that when we do them badly, we find it hard to admit that we're doing it badly and say, okay, let's change. And that's it. I hope that made some sense. That's my perspective on how the internet should work. Thank you.